Thank you for joining us. My name is Jill Davey, and I'm one of the Dharma teachers with True North Insight. And we'll have a short introduction of some Dharma topics and themes for tonight, and then a practice, semi-guided, semi-silent together. Yeah. So tonight is a feels like I appreciate seeing the some folks that are here on the Zoom call that are knitting or stitching, and because the sutta means to sew together, and this talk tonight really feels like that, kind of some pieces that I'm hopefully will thread together into some sort of a weaving or a picture of some sort. May it be so. Let's see what happens. So, this is inspired because this past weekend I had quite a long meditation and some helpful insights and experiences that arose for me through that. Um, Part of it is related to Mother's Day, which passed this past Sunday. And there was a really very deep and felt experience of the grief of Mother's Day. Not the Hallmark version of just the joy and you're the best mom. Many beings uh, have very difficult and complex and painful experiences um, with both their parents, but in this case, I'm just talking about what was showing up for me recently in terms of mothering. And I think it's helpful to talk about that and to be forthright about the truth of that experience. And so many people feel judged or inadequate or the grief of missing out on some sort of other version of a parenting experience. And there arose a felt experience of connection to a very quite deep and profound, overwhelming at times, grief of all the mothers, we could say all the parents, but this is how it arose for me, so that's what I'm sharing, and it's not meant to be gendered, it's just how it showed up. And Colombia and India and Palestine and Afghanistan and Burma. I mean, we we could name all the countries of the world and have a sense of the grieving, the loss, the harm, the pain that is being experienced right in this moment and through time. So it can, yeah. So there was a sense of this through history, through time, and around the world. Um, and another one of the threads was that I spend a good, some of us here spent a few many hours today online in a with the class action lawsuit for the Crown wards that I've mentioned before in some talks. Uh, mm, so children that were wards of the state or the Crown in Canada that were abused when they were under that care or not given the resources and support and were also experiencing abuse. And so there was a part of a class action lawsuit proceedings today, in short. I'm just saying this in short, but what stood out for me was the hundreds of people. So on a Zoom page, like pages and pages of beings, and the grief, the loss, the pain, and how much they wanted to be heard. So whenever court was in recess for their lunch break and the judge and lawyer are off having their break, all these dear ones stayed and were talking to each other. They were allowed to unmute their microphones and could talk to each other. And it was just so, um, the sense of them just want to be heard, just wanted to be heard. It was really profound. Great deal of sorrow and grief. It reminds me of one of the suttas and teachings that we've mentioned before. There was another talk on grief and hope and how they work together some time back. And when was that? It was June last year. Oh my Lord. And yeah, thank you for sharing that, Patty. They wanted to be noticed and believed, absolutely. And there's a story of Kisi Gautama. She kind of had this nickname of being Skinny Gautama, and the sutta is called Kisi Gautama and the Mustard Seed. And this is a woman who's experiencing immense grief and loss at the death of her son, and goes to the Buddha eventually. There's a longer story before that, but people suggest she speaks to the Buddha to find some release for her suffering. She's looking for someone to bring back her son from her young baby from death. And the Buddha, I didn't look it up and read it again just before this talk, so it's not, I'm not, this is a loose paraphrasing, but instructs her or offers her that to go to a house, find any house, any home in the village, in the community, where no one has experienced loss and grief, and bring back a mustard seed from that home. And if you do, then I will be able to heal your son, something like that. And mustard seed is like the most affordable spice in India. It's very common. Every home would have mustard seed. And of course, as she goes door to door pleading, is there anybody here that hasn't experienced this type of grief and loss? She's not able to find anyone, and this goes on for some time until she finally realizes this is our human experience. This is our common ground. This is part of this life experience. And through that understanding of our interconnectedness, of our impermanence, of loss and grief and sorrow, she experiences awakening and becomes, enters the path, as we would say. I was also struck by another teaching from a woman in the time of the Buddha. Her name was Sujata. And there's different versions of this story, so I'm going to tell you the version that I like best. No, I'll mention the others as well. So the Buddha, after he left home, is very comfortable and privileged and comfortable and privileged life. And then left home and became a wandering monk and began his quest for awakening, for freedom from suffering. Um, and he found some teachers and studied with them concentration techniques and mastered those techniques and was asked to join their community and teach with them and then to be the teacher. And he said no, because those practices still didn't show him, give him the experience of liberation. Uh, So then there came a time where he was practicing, some accounts say 6 years, some accounts say 7 years of extreme, I find it hard to say this word, so let me just pause, asceticism. Extreme asceticism, which means extreme austerities, very, very denying the body, extreme striving practices. And there's a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, it's MN 36 for people that like to read the suttas, MN 36. And there's this description of how he was practicing for these 6 or 7 years. And maybe you can relate it to some level, maybe to the first aspect of this. I won't go into all the description because it gets pretty gruesome, but uh, he says reportedly, I thought, suppose that I, clenching my teeth and pressing my tongue against the roof of my mouth, were to beat down, constrain, and crush my mind with my awareness. Anybody here practice like that? I know I have. Come on. You can do, strive, stay longer, sit longer, stay on that breath, this kind of gritting our teeth, striving, making pain in our bellies and necks, trying to crush the mind with awareness. and And then there's more description of how he did this with such striving. As I did, sweat poured from my armpits. And although tireless persistence was aroused in me, so he was able to pull up like this great energy to just stay and stay. Boy, this happens so much, like on the 3-month retreat. Oh, people that just sit for hours and hours, and sometimes it may be effortless and just like they're just like into a certain place, and sometimes there's definitely extreme striving happening. And so this tireless persistence arose in him, and then unmuddled mindfulness was established. So he did have energy and persistence and mindfulness, but he says, my body was aroused and uncalm because of the painful exertion. So I'm sure you can relate to that, right? We may be able to really pull up a lot of energy and force ourselves to be mindful, but what kind of tension and pain are we creating at that time? So he goes on in his exploration and striving, and he says, I thought, well, suppose, um, because he was still aroused and not calm in his body, he then goes on to the next strategy. Suppose I were to become absorbed in the trance of non-breathing, right? So holding your breath. Suppose I stopped the in-breaths and the out-breaths in my nose and my mouth. And as I did so, there was a loud roaring of winds coming out of my ear holes, just like the loud roar of winds coming out of a smith's bellows. You'll find that out if you hold your breath long enough. And so then I stopped the in-breaths and the out-breaths in my nose and my mouth and my ears. he goes on then to describe the excruciating pain that was piercing his head and his belly, and like he just got racked with sharp, painful, extreme pains, holding his breath in this way. And he says again, same thing. There was striving, persistence, and mindfulness, but the body was, of course, aroused and not calm because of this painful exertion. And then he comes to the next striving. Suppose I were to practice going altogether without food. Yeah, so I'll just shorten that part. And so he says, suppose I only took a little food at a time, only a handful at a time of soup, and various soups, but all just soup. My body, so he did this for a long time, my body became extremely emancipated simply from eating so little. And then it goes into quite a description, which I won't go into, of what happened to the body with that prolonged deprivation. Yes, it's quite extreme. And then eventually he comes to the, so in this time, this is where I wanted to get to Sujata. So you sometimes, if you look this up, if you look up like images of fasting Buddha, you'll see like pictures of sculptures of the Buddha sitting in a meditation posture with like just bones, flesh, and just skin and bones. Very pretty disturbing images, but interesting, because most often we don't see that image of the Buddha. So at this time of years, 6 or 7 years of this extreme striving, they also are descriptions of sleeping on bed of nails and these kind of practices that are still done in India by ascetics. And eventually this milkmaid came along, Sujata, and brought him a bowl, an offering of milky rice called kheer. And he, it, to me, that felt like an offering of seeing this suffering. Like, you could be walking through the forest where they're meditating and see someone in that state, near death, with starvation. If you had milky rice to offer, I'm sure you would. It's a response to suffering and seeing that he nearly died. And it is through that offering. So here's the other version of the Sujata story that I said I would mention, that I'm less fond of, where I like to feel that it was an offering made from compassion. Some versions say that it was her offering to tree deities because she was asking for a husband that was of a certain status or worthy of her level in society, and a son. And so it, and that the Buddha sitting there, who at this time was not the Buddha, was Siddhartha Gautama, was thought to be a tree deity that she was bringing this rice to. And then that, yeah, anyways, I like my version better. Seeing suffering, offering compassion, and responding in this way. And it is through that offering, and from him accepting that gift, that dana, receiving that and accepting that into his body, that he then began awakening to the middle path, the Eightfold Path, the way the middle path from the extreme pleasance and all the comforts of life and almost dying from the extreme deprivation, came to the middle path. Um, so this was striking me. You know, it's reflecting on the Buddha's mother, the Buddha's wife. I don't know if he had sisters. That was something I meant to research that I didn't get to yet. Yeah, and this, yeah, the women in the Buddha's story. And then I found out today that this is actually a time of the Tathagata festival. The Tathagata is actually a compilation, a book of verses of the elder nuns. And this May 3rd to the 16th is an international celebration of the poems of these elder nuns. So their teachings of awakening and from the perspective of nuns, which is hard to come by, and a really treasured collection. Uh, so that's pretty lovely. And so in the Zoom here, and if you're watching on YouTube, there'll be a link down below to some resources of amazing Dharma talks that are happening and around this Tathagata festival. So yeah, all of these threads were weaving together for me around uh, suffering and the role of compassion and grief and how they work together. So some notes on this. You may have heard this one before. Ajahn Chah, who is a very well known and revered Dharma teacher um, and monk, obviously, said, I shouldn't have said obviously, that was rude. What Ajahn means that he was a monk. I apologize for that. He said, there are two kinds of suffering. The suffering that you run away from, which follows you everywhere, and the suffering that you are willing to turn and face. There you will find the liberation that the Buddha taught for all of us. So turning towards the suffering, the grief, is part of the path. Not an easy part, admittedly. But it's, Ajahn Chah is saying there you will find the liberation that the Buddha taught for all of us. And another amazing teacher, Frank Ostaseki, yes, Ostaseki, who wrote this beautiful book, The Five Invitations. I'll also put the name in chat and down below, Discovering What Death Can Teach Us About Living Fully. So Frank is one of the founders of Zen Hospice, and um, yeah, he says this, grief is our common ground. And this, that was something I had mentioned earlier, you know, that we the same as the story of Kisigotami and the mustard seed, right? This is part of our shared experience. He says it's like the connective tissue that joins us to others in sorrow and joy. Opening compassionately to our grief, we open to our whole self and we open to life. So here comes this connection with compassion. When we connect with suffering, the heart is stirred there with compassion. And he then is recounting a story here of a student that was sharing the news of the death of a dear friend. And after listening completely to the story of her loss, he asked her what else she was feeling in addition to the sorrow and pain. And she said, well, actually, as I sit here, still and quiet, I can feel something else inside. Something bigger than the sadness. a kind of connection, a peacefulness, a love, like a big love. This is so profound that it is through the fire of dukkha that we come to the big love, something bigger than the sadness. It can feel like the grief is overwhelming and I can't go near it. I can't touch it because I will be destroyed. I will not be able to function. And yet, these teachings are saying that if we actually can, you know, with guidance, with support, whatever is needed, as much as we are possible, as much as is available or possible for us, that it is through this that the connection and awareness and deep compassion arise. And he says, with awareness, we begin to appreciate that we are more than the grief. And here, I love this line. Catch this. We are what the grief is moving through. Wow. That's so touching. Wow. We are more than the grief. We are what the grief is moving through. I don't know if you can sense that, trust that, feel that. Even if you can't connect with it, just let that land somewhere in your body, in your heart, mind, awareness, that we are what the grief is moving through. So this is pointing to awareness. That is bigger than the grief. Compassionate, loving, heartful, even joyful awareness is larger than the grief. Okay. Uh-oh, I said it was going to be a short talk. Oh, dang. I could go on this one because it's really alive and fresh for me. And of course, the magic of this universe, it's crazy. All these things just kept landing and coming after this experience on the weekend. I kept getting people sending me stuff on grief, and then Rosemary sends this poem. Rosemary Witola Trummer. Gosh, this is amazing. It's called Porous. Gosh, amazing. She says, yesterday I widened to hold it all, made room in the heart for every pain and every joy, a vase infinitely large to hold an infinite banquet of feelings. Today, all it took was two beautiful questions. Why do you think you must hold it all? Wow. What if you let it all pass through? In that moment, the vase didn't shatter. It simply disappeared. And the infinite feelings I'd been stretching to hold, I felt them all. I felt them all, then felt them move through me the way water runs through a colander, the way oxygen moves through the thin walls of alveoli, the way sand moves through the center of the hourglass. Oh boy, profound. Yeah, what makes us think we need to hold it all? It's bigger than us, and we are bigger than all of that. Our awareness, We all have this capacity. So let us practice. Let us practice with deep love and compassion and honesty and less striving than Siddhartha Gautama did before he nearly died from it. Okay, friends, so let's get posture comfortable, supportive, upright, or maybe reclining. What does your heart, body, mind need? Begin with compassion for yourself. Maybe you need to dim your lights or turn away from the computer or lay down. So take your time. I'm going to adjust my posture here. Okay. Oh. Hmm. All right. So taking any sighing breaths that your body might need. These were difficult topics to be bringing up in a time when many of us are already feeling a great deal of grief at the this was another aspect of it, grief at the how our greed, hatred, and delusion is not only killing each other and our children, but is also killing the earth itself. Yeah, so the heart and mind might be feeling really tender and raw right now. And as much as feels appropriate and safe and okay for you tonight, to allow that to be there. Understanding that this is our common experience, our common grief, fears, wounds, our common ground. And if you feel like your system is really activated and needs some soothing, you might find it helpful to place a hand at the heart or open your eyes. Take a break from this if it feels too much. So right now we're just arriving into our practice. And some of us were sharing before the recording different ways that help us to arrive in the present moment. So it may be some deeper breaths. It may be your intention for why you're practicing. It may be this sense of taking refuge. Where do you find solace and safety? It may be in community. It may be in nature, or it may be with the triple gem, as I was talking about before the recording. So just checking in with yourself. What helps you to land here? Feeling the ground was another teaching offered by one of the participants here on the Zoom. Feeling the contact of the body with the ground. And as you feel a little more settled or present through breath or ground or intention, refuge, touch into what is here for you at this moment. 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows. We're all experiencing immense grief at the state of our world. And for some, it might feel like that is held in a place in the body. May feel like tension in the belly or numbness in the heart, uh, contraction in the throat, pressure, the temples. So, what bodily sensations are here for you that are a signaling of this shared experience of pain, grief, loss? Not adding to the story of it right now, but just feeling it. Oh, this has affected the body. This is here in this body. Yeah, and if it feels overwhelming, a hand at the heart or opening the eyes, taking some deep breaths can be helpful if it feels like it's too much. And as Ajahn Chah taught, that it's the suffering that we are willing to turn and face. It is there that we'll find the liberation that the Buddha taught for all of us. And now we let the awareness widen. Let the awareness widen, spacious, interconnected. And perhaps a little touch of the knowing, or a real opening into this felt experience that there is something bigger than the sadness. Kind of connection, a peacefulness, a love, a big love. Awareness itself is knowing all of this. This journey through grief can lead us to a profound understanding that reaches beyond our individual loss. We are more than the grief. We are what the grief is moving through. Allow yourself the gift, the knowing of the infinite, boundless compassion. As Rosemary reminded us, we don't need to hold it. It's all passing through. In the space of infinite awareness. And we might find it helpful to add phrase of awareness or intention. I care about this pain. May I open to the compassion that is available. A reminder, if you feel overwhelmed or ungrounded, you could open your eyes. Just let go of that practice, or place a hand at the heart, or hold your face with a kind, compassionate touch. Allowing ourselves to receive and to offer in our heart mind awareness the sweetness of milky rice for our parched hearts. Letting go of some of the striving. And opening to the compassionate response to grief and suffering. And similarly to how we began the practice, noticing if you're holding your breath or holding tension, you can just begin again with some releasing breaths or feeling the ground beneath you or taking refuge. Where do you find safety and solace and support? If your attention has become contracted around thoughts, stories, memories, imaginings, and see if you can allow that to move through like sand through the center of the hourglass or water through the colander, and open into this imagined experience or felt experience or invitation of boundless awareness, boundless love, boundless compassion that is bigger than the grief. If you feel uncertain or overwhelmed, come back to the beginning place of your practice with your breath or the ground or opening your eyes. or for these last few minutes of silence, continuing to connect to this really wide, inclusive, interconnected awareness. All of the thoughts, emotions, sensations, sounds, all the sense door experiences that are happening in this present moment are happening in the field of boundless awareness that's knowing all of that. So gently transitioning from that practice. If you've joined us on the YouTube recording, please check the links down below, and I'll link to Rosemary's poem and Frank's book and the sutta, and also the Taragata Festival for the Book of Verses of the Elder Nuns. And there's also a link there to support me if you're able. And I'll put the link for the fundraiser for True North Insight that's coming up with Joseph Goldstein, Pascal Auclair, and Dawn Maruccio. Okay, thank you for joining us.